So if you're going to continue to play Minecraft, you have to do it deceptively and behind my back.
No problem. No problem whatsoever.
I'm frantically using Maya.
What happened? Sorry, I didn't say it.
Damn it, Maya.
I'm using Maya. We're making tree houses.
Okay. So.
Oh man.
So we have Maya open. Again, how I did that, I started Maya, it didn't work, restarted the computer, logged into everything again, started Maya again. So I have a completely empty version of Maya. But again, I know what people want to do is just double click on the Maya file. Again, I need to remind you that the reason not to do that is because Maya wants to know where your project is, right? You can have multiple projects going at any given time. Just by double clicking on it, you would think Maya would just say, oh, okay, the project must be in this bridge folder where they double clicked. But because of really complicated folder structures that you can have, that's not always the case, right? So I promise you, the number one question I get in this class, but I'm going to rephrase that. The largest number of questions I get in this class can be answered simply by saying, you forgot to set your project. That fixes so many problems that so many people have. I can't tell you how many people are like, Marlo, all of my textures are gone, everything is lost, I'm going to have to drop out of college. Like, did you set your project? I think so. Set your project, it fixes it, right? However, sometimes setting your project or forgetting to set your project means you're going to make things happen that are not fixable. Like you're going to lose hours and hours and hours of work. So I know it sounds like I'm hammering on this a lot, but the appropriate way to open your Maya file is to open Maya first, and we just have an empty Maya scene, right? And then we're going to set our project to the folder. So File, Set Project. And mine is stored on my E drive or something. Let's see. Yeah, this Scratch E folder under Greg. And so I just select the bridge and hit Set. And then I can go File, Open Scene, and it's immediately going to take me to the correct location. Now, hopefully I downloaded the right file. Bridge reconstructed. So I didn't save over my old one. I saved it as a new file type or a new file name. I hit open, don't save that empty scene, and this is what I got. So how many of you have something similar to this? Okay. Now, if you don't, I would say get that done relatively soon because you're going to have to post some images of that. But this is actually the starting point for today's class. Okay. This is the beginning of what we will eventually make in Project 1. Right? So before we start making stuff, I'm going to go ahead and put my entire bridge in a layer. Okay. And the reason for this is I want to be able to hide it. I want to be able to come back to this later. But what I'm actually going to make now is a car. I want to make something to drive across that bridge, right? And you'll see in the future project, or when we're looking at our project, the things that we're actually targeting getting done. But there'll be times when I want to model something, I want to do something, and other objects are getting in my way. And this is where layers become very handy. So I want to select all of my bridge by dragging, selecting. And then I'm just going to click this little plus, or this little button over here in the corner. Can you all see? How about if I turn this off so you can see that a little better? This little button in the corner on my menu, or my my channel box, my layer editor here. This one that has like a sphere and a little box on it. You all see that over there? All right. Click that, and now my bridge is in that layer, and I can hide it and unhide it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to click this little button right over here twice till it says R in it. And so that means now, even if I do create something, I can't accidentally select my bridge and mess it up. So I've kind of locked your bridge, or I've locked my bridge so I don't accidentally mess it up. So all that hard work you did is a little bit safer now. So putting this together, like what were things that sort of slowed you down? What were things that maybe caused you any issues? Anything?
I was trying to figure out the ropes, which side belongs to which side, because the ropes weren't adding up when I first put them all together, so I had to like switch sides, and it didn't end well.
Sometimes the angles.
It took me a good extra 20 minutes.
Angles of things.
I was confused because in your model the wires go to the top part and mine only fit to the bottom. Never mind, I'm just looking at it wrong. Forget what I said.
Okay. So here's one of the things. I want to alleviate some of your concern. I'm not going to be looking at this to be like, is it a millimeter off or whatever, right? Like there are times for accuracy, right? And then there are times for aesthetic, right? If you're modeling a bracket that has to go on the space shuttle, accuracy is very important, right? You're going to 3D print this thing, and you're going to build something that has to carry like a payload of fuel to the moon. Yeah, like that micron is very important, right?
That might be an explosive issue.
However, for film, like for games, we actually prioritize aesthetic, right? So something may not be perfectly accurate, but it should look right, or it should look appealing. And so that's really what I'm going to be looking at. Did you put something together that looks appealing? Some of the things that will make it not look appealing is maybe like some stuff's a little wonky, like a little like out of rotation. So let's say you have, unlock this. Let's say if you have this road and it's just slightly off like this, right? Like that's just gonna make it feel a little weird, right? So a lot of the things that you can do here is creating these numbers much more precisely, right? In this case, if I zeroed all of those out, they would go back to the right number. So getting the angles perfectly right, as somebody said, right? Like if we go in here and look, my rotate X is at -7, right? And I can probably just make that more of a whole number to get that right. So if I did that as 0, we're getting that. So some of these numbers are lining up like this because of the way I made them. Some of them for other reasons, and not all of them are going to work out just to type in 1 and 0. But that's how we can get a little bit more precision. But again, this is all for accurate or for aesthetic. So if you like the design differently, like maybe you would rather have this something more like this, right? Or if you just want to, after this little exercise is over here, after discussion one is over, if you just decide you want to make a completely new bridge from scratch, right? You want to put a majestic dragon like sculpture on the top of it or whatever, like this is yours, right? So this is going to go into a much larger project. Make it your own, okay? All right. So we have this model, and what we've created is the sort of the simplest level of modeling, right? We have some primitive shapes that Maya has made for us, right? Sphere, cylinder, cubes, and we stack those together like little tinker toys or little blocks, right? To make something that kind of resembles an object. And for something very geometric, that works fine. There's a lot of shapes that you can't do that way, though, right? Like some shapes, some objects are just too complicated to make out of just primitive objects, and we have to be able to start manipulating and getting more fidelity into that model, right? So that's what we're going to be talking about today. So what I'm going to do again, my bridge, I've locked it. I'm going to go ahead and hide it. I'm going to go ahead and make an object just so we can look at the components that make up that object. So I'm going to make a new sphere just so we can look at this. Okay. Now again, there are so many things that I can do with the tools I've already taught you. I can move this, I can rotate this, I can scale this. And for some things that may be enough, right? If I wanted to make a disk, I could just scale this and now I have a disk, right? and that's cool. But again, like if I wanted to make a human head, there is no way I can scale this sphere that it would suddenly look like, you know, Brad Pitt or whatever, right? I mean, so that means we have to actually start needing to have more control of this. So let's go back to that sphere. Now, some of you have probably already noticed that this is made up out of a mesh, out of a wireframe. You're probably already familiar with that phrase, even wireframe, even if you've never delved into modeling or animation or anything like that. So what we're talking about is these lines that go all the way over it, all the way around it. Now, these lines aren't just for decorative or to like let you be able to see the form of it. These are actually the objects that make up this model. And we can actually see those. They're called components or sub-objects. We can actually see those components or sub-objects and manipulate them just by right-clicking. So if I right-click on my model and hold that down, I get this menu that pops up, right? And so we have vertex, edge, we have a couple of others. We have object mode, and we have face. Let's focus on those three: vertex, edge, and face. And object mode just means that's how we've been editing it, where we're manipulating the entire object. Let's right click and go to vertex. And look at that. So you'll see I got all these little dots all over it, right? And if I drag and select some of these, I can start manipulating the object as a collection of these sub-objects. So this is where my PowerPoint comes out again. So we're going to talk about the different elements, the different sub-objects that exist, sort of theoretically, before we jump in there and start doing too much with them in the real world. So how do I do my slideshow from the beginning? Here we go. So we're going to start with a point. Right? This point, called a vertex. So a vertex is just a point in space, right, that has no depth, width, height, nothing like that. It's just a point in space. So, if I were to make 2 points in space, right, what is the, like, we can connect these 2 points in space in any way that we would want to, right? Like, I could get up here with a Sharpie marker, give each of you a Sharpie marker. We could draw infinite numbers of paths between these two lines, right? Or these two dots. But what is the simplest path? Straight line. That's the simplest. That is also the shortest, right? Those two pieces of information are important. Simplest, meaning it requires the least amount of calculation, right? Again, with this information, I could draw a straight line with 2 pieces of data, right? Remember that XYZ we had earlier. I can give you the XYZ of point 1, XYZ of point 2, and say, connect those two, and we could all draw the same line, right? So in Maya, we're going to call this straight line an edge, okay? So let's talk about, again, kind of going a little more theoretical here, right? I recently bought a house, has a little bit of a field with it, right? Let's say I wanted to own a cow. And I bought a cow, and I needed to make sure my cow didn't run away. Cows do that sometimes.
Yeah, I found out.
So I need to put it in an enclosure, right? So what is the smallest number of edges I need to enclose that cow?
3, 4.
I feel like you're just stabbing in the dark here. So let's think about this. We have 1. The cow can still get away, right? We have 2. Cows aren't very smart. It may not get away, but it still could, right? There's a good chance the cow would still stay in this enclosure forever and never know it's captive or it has a possibility of freedom. We need at least 1 more to completely enclose this area, right? So a triangle is the smallest number of edges we could have to have an enclosed area. Well, in Maya, any enclosed area of edges we can call a face. So our computer understands how to render an object or how to draw an object by calculating these three things, right? The simplest form of, well, actually, the most complicated form of game engine or anything that you've ever used that has 3D data being drawn on screen uses this method. The computer needs to know these 3 points. It can then connect those 3 points in space, and it can say, from those 3 points, I can create an enclosed area to create a renderable face, right? So these are the 3 elements that we need to be able to make a 3D model, right? Or to manipulate a 3D model. So again, vertex, edge, face, right? Now, again, any enclosed area of edges can be a face. 3 edges is a triangle. And that is the simplest one that we can have inside of a, well, just geometrically, it's the simplest one we can have, right? It's a triangle. However, if we duplicate and flip those 2 triangles across this line, right? And delete that middle line, we have a 4-sided enclosure. Now, in 3D modeling, we call this a quad. Okay? Quad as in 4. Now, the reason this is useful is because a quad is a little bit easier to, sorry, I guess my preview what's next. A quad is a little bit easier to interpret when it comes to looking at a bunch of them, right? And in Maya, you're going to want to use quads as much as you can. Quads or tris are really going to be your most efficient way to create models. I know this is all like kind of confusing. I'm sort of throwing theory out here, but once we get into it, I can show you a little bit more. So the reason for that is if we look at this quad, right? If I were to stack a whole bunch of them side by side, it's pretty easy to, or even in this direction here, right? It's pretty easy to discern the flow of these edges, or of these faces, right? Like we can kind of just look at this and it makes a pattern, right? That our edge is flowing, our edges are flowing this way, right? Or our edges are flowing this way. So that's what we call this, is edge flow, right? So this is significant because there are going to be times that you need to create new edges, right? You're going to need to insert a new edge and or a new edge loop, a new like ring of edges, right? And to do that, like knowing the edge flow is going to allow you to interpret that better. If all of this were triangles, it would be really confusing to figure out which way those edges should flow. Okay? So, sort of back to our model here. If I right click, actually before I go into that, any questions on what I just went over? I'm sure the bigger question is like, so what? Right? Like that was very theoretical. How do we apply this to Maya, right? So this is really handy. Like we can manipulate all 3 of those component types on any polygon object we create. If I right click on here, let's see, vertex, edge, face. So if I go to vertex, I can select a vertex. I can move it. I could rotate it and scale it, but as we said, a vertex has no width or depth or anything like that, right? So it's not really going to do anything if I tried to rotate this, like, yeah, nothing really happens, right? However, I can select a group of vertices. I can move those. I can rotate those, and I can scale those. So I can start to make a little bit more of a complicated object out of this. So that's with vertices. Vertices is the plural of vertex. Vertex is a singular. So again, right click again. If I go to edges, you'll see that I can select any of these lines, right? Now if I zoom in here, if I kind of zoom out a little bit, right, it looks like this is a smooth curve. Let me hide my grid a little bit so you can see this, right? It looks like this is a smooth curve, right? But if I zoom in here close, you'll see that it's actually just made up of little bitty straight lines. Those lines are not bent because the closest distance between any 2 points is a straight line, right? So all an edge is a line that connects any 2 vertices. So I can select an edge, I can move it, right? I can rotate it, I can scale it. And really, if you think about that, all I'm doing is rotating 2 vertices, right? So that's really how I'm manipulating this. If I'm rotating an edge, it's controlling 2 vertices. Let's go ahead and undo, get back to here. Again, right click, go to face. I can choose a face. And you'll notice that for the most part, this is made up of quads, right? There are some triangles at the top just because it's a little complicated to try to pinch all that together into quads. It's doable, but this is sort of the basic model that we will get. Tries to use quads where it can, where it can't, it will use triangles. And that's a pretty good rule for you to follow as well. When you're modeling, try to use quads when you can. If you can't, use triangles. Now, the reason for that is for deformation purposes. Like once we start deforming stuff, if you have a whole bunch of like 20-sided faces, it's going to deform kind of incorrectly because Maya has to just take a guess at how you wanted that shape to be filled in. So don't sweat that part too much. So here's a couple of interesting things. Again, I can select multiples. If I hold shift, I can select individual multiple faces, right? And again, I can scale them, I can rotate them, I can move them. So this small amount of manipulation is how we can start changing these primitives into something more complicated. Now, that whole edge flow, edge loop thing that we were talking about. If I right click on this and go to edge, you'll see that I can select an edge. Like I said, I can move it, do whatever I want to with it. But let's say I wanted to get this entire edge loop, this entire ring of edges. Well, to select that, if I hold shift and go around through here, I can slowly select this entire edge loop, right? Takes forever. So there's a trick to this. If I click on this edge once, I select that edge. But if I double click on that edge, I get that whole loop. Now, that's kind of cool, because now that I have that whole loop, I can start scaling that, start getting a little bit more modeling control here. So I can start making something like this. Now, in faces, we have something similar. If we go to face, if I select one face, I can go around here and start selecting whole face loops if I wanted to, or edge loops, or face loops is the right way to say it. Like this. But the other thing I can do is if I select one, if I double click the next one, it will just get that whole ring of loops, right? So again, I can scale that in, and I can start making a little bit more dynamic models, right? Now, I still want to acknowledge the fact that that would be a lot of manipulation to move all of these vertices and turn this sphere into Brad Pitt, right? Like it's
just a few.
Just a few, yeah, like 5 or 6. We should be able to get a pretty good likeness. So that's where edge flow comes into becomes handy, right? So as much as we learn to draw faces by starting off with a sphere, right, or a circle, our faces are actually way more complicated than that, right? We are made up of all sorts of different flowing muscles and stuff like that. And so edge flow is how we can get more dynamic models. Don't sweat that too much. We're going to get into some of that in this class, but modeling for entertainment in your sophomore year would be where you would delve into that pretty deeply. So we're going to try to keep the models relatively simple in here. There is going to be a little bit of modeling involved just because it's 3D. Like if I gave you all the models, it would be a little boring for you, right? You get to make your own stuff, and sometimes that's the fun part is getting to make your own thing and then make that thing move. But what I will say is you can make some photorealistic stuff in this. Almost everything that you see in visual effects is like at some point probably came out of Maya or a similar modeling tool. There are other more complex modeling tools. ZBrush is an example. Anybody ever played around with ZBrush?
I know what it is.
Yeah, ZBrush is like a digital sculpting tool. So instead of having like, this is probably like 100 or so polygons on this or 100 and so faces, ZBrush, you would maybe have a couple of million. And it would be so dense you would barely be able to see the faces. And instead of moving one vertex at a time, you sculpt on it as if it's clay. Right? And so that's how more organic models are created. There's some steps you have to do after that to make them usable because a game engine or even Maya is not going to respond very well to a 3 million polygon object in your scene. It's going to bog it down, right? Okay. So what's the point of all that, right? So what we're going to try to do today is we're going to try to make some slightly more complicated objects. We're going to make sort of some toy cars, right? They don't have to be necessarily toys, but I don't want you trying to feel like you have to model a photorealistic car. So a cartoony car, right? So the first thing I would what do you think the first thing is you do before you're going to model something? Oh, got it right on the first guess. So this is probably the other thing I have to harp on the most as a teacher in digital media is I know you think you know what it looks like. You're wrong, right? Let's try an example. Take out a piece of paper. If you, I encourage you to participate. You don't have to, but I would encourage you to. Take out a piece of paper, and without Googling any reference, this is not something you have to turn in. It's just a little doodle. You can draw it on the back of your notes or whatever. I want you to draw me, without looking up any reference, I want you to draw me a stick figure version of a bicycle. I gave you about a minute. I'll go ahead and open up Photoshop or something like that so I can try it along with you. Okay. How's it going? There are lines, right? Okay. So what most people usually do, this is sort of the process of it. They're like, okay, bicycle, bi meaning two, cycle meaning wheel or something. I don't know Latin. And so they draw two wheels, right? They're like, there's the front wheel. It's a little wobbly, but it's okay. There's the back wheel. Goodness gracious, I'm a digital artist.
Why not just use the circle tool?
I could, yeah.
It's 10%.
So, bicycle, right? We got the bi and sickle up there. And this is really where it stops, right? You're like, and then it's connected together in the middle with some junk. Like, I think there's some handlebars too. Let's draw some handlebars. Like, I think they're up here, right? We got two of them. You got two arms. And then the rest of it's really kind of confusing. Like, most of you will probably remember that there's like a line that goes down to here, like a bar that goes to there. But it's connecting these two together that's confusing. Right? No matter how much you think you know, like most people don't. Most people are like, wait, is it like, is there like a line between here? Is there a, oh man, is there a, like, I know there's a seat here. Does the seat go on top of this line, right? And the more you do this, the more, I know what it's like now because I've taught this class before. But if we look up pictures of a bicycle, like half of you probably saw one walking into class today. Like we don't pay attention to it, but this is what we have, right? It's like two triangles side by side and two bars going diagonal, right? So we get our seat here, right? This one going down, and then basically you get a triangle going to there, and a triangle going to there. Right? Of course, you got your pedals here and the sprocket chain and all. But this is. But most people, how many of you got that right when you drew it?
I don't draw bikes.
Yeah, so somewhere, I think statistically somewhere between like 10 to 25% of people will get it right. And that means 75% of people get it wrong, right?
A great example of when people say like, oh, you need to be able to draw this through memory without a reference.
Yeah. Why?
It's not like Leonardo didn't look at references when he was.
So that's the problem. Most people think reference is cheating, right? And I'm going to blame the public school system on that one, right? Like, can I refer to my multiplication tables? No, that's cheating. Well,
Half of us still can't.
you're allowed to refer to your multiplication tables now in the real world, right? So,
Wow.
the problem with that is that we prioritize this like testing idea, and that's not always the best way for you to learn. And so reference is not cheating. In fact, reference is the right answer. Reference is the way you do this. Reference is not copying either. Reference is getting an informed idea in your head before you start creating, right? Because any other type of idea is an uninformed idea, which usually results in something wrong or misguided or completely incorrect, right? And so, like, I'm going to model a car, and even though I drove one in today, I am not 100% sure I remember. It's like I don't remember what I don't remember, right? So like some of its proportions, like how tall is a car exactly? Is it like where is the roof like here? Is it like here? Is it here? I can't remember. It's somewhere in there, right? Like what's the proportion of the trunk to the hood? Oh, like
Somewhere.
yeah. A really interesting tidbit. Me and my wife were like scrolling through, I don't know, Instagram, Facebook, something, and this video of a moose like that was circulating. It's like this guy was driving along and like filming this moose walking down the middle of the intersection, and my wife was like, "That's fake," and I'm like, "I don't think it's fake." She's like, "That thing is enormous. Moose are not that tall." Turns out they are. Like their backs is somewhere between 6.5 to 7 feet high. It's like here. Right? That's not including their heads, right? So moose are terrifying dinosaur creatures. Yeah, I don't know why I felt the need to tell you that, but it did. So now you know, moose are big. Let's Google cars.
I'm gonna have a moose going over my bridge.
Google is exact. Oh, please, somebody got a moose car. I actually almost searched moose just now. Car. So, very boldly image searching without safe search on. We will see that we're going to get all sorts of different types of cars here, right? So this is up to you. You make the car you want to make, but we're going to make 3 of them, right? But right now, let's just start with one. So some of you may want to make a sports car. Some of you may want to make a roadster. Some of you may want to make a Lamborghini. Some of you may just want to make a sedan. Some of you may want a version of your car. There have been plenty of Volkswagen buses in this assignment. So whatever it is you want to model, you could probably narrow that down. Let's do car. I'm just going to do a simple sedan, something nice and vanilla. So this is such an infinitely amazing resource that we have right here that has not existed for generations. Back in my day, we had to get up and go outside to look at a car. So we have it right here, and you can find so many good references. So I'm just going to, again, I'm going to make something very cartoony. So I'm going to kind of find something in the rough proportions of a sedan. Yeah, so maybe this guy, right? And I'll just open it up so I can have it there. Now later I'll show you ways, if you're needing more precision, of bringing these images into Maya for reference. But right now I'm just going to kind of eyeball it and get something that, using this as my inspiration for my car, right? You inspire me, used sedan. There we go. So, there we go. So I have this over on my other screen just so I can glance over at it periodically and reference it. So, actually, let me pull it back over here for a second. So really the question now, step number 2, what do I do now? I have my reference. Make a box. So, so you could do that. You could break it down if you want to study the image a little more precisely. But let's say we've done that. Let's just get into Maya and start doing however much some people are going to really break down all of the information about the image. Some people are going to kind of start going and using that. Yeah.
How much detail do you want into these cars? Because I don't want to make a box with wheels and all that.
I will.
I don't want to put all the.
Something like this. We're gonna make
Okay.
something.
Simple. Okay. Simple.
You can kind of see some examples in the video. So actually, if you're wanting to follow along with this, what we're probably going to get to today is somewhere around here, maybe rigging. So yeah, something not too much, right? And so for that, we do need, if we're going to start modeling now, we do need a starting point, right? And Maya doesn't have a make car button. Yes. Okay. So let me actually show you this really quick. If you've gone into orthographic, you can't really tumble in here. You can only pan and zoom. Does it allow you to do that? Yeah. Okay. Yeah, you can tumble, but we have to unlock it to be able to do that. But then your proportions are going to be incorrect. I think the way you would do that though is selecting your camera, and it's somewhere under your attributes in here. So if you want to get back to your perspective view, just tap your space bar again and find perspective. There's a couple of other ways. This is a good question because this will happen to you eventually. There's a couple of other ways. One is you can go to panels, and there's your perspective camera there, and your orthographic cameras here. You can also hold down your space bar and click on the word Maya, and it'll give you a bunch of cameras to choose from there as well. Okay. So there's not a create car button. There's a lot of primitives though. If I go up to create, polygon primitives, you'll see that I get a lot of things to choose from. This is probably pretty good to kind of study these. Like we got, sphere, plane, torus, cube, all these different things. Pyramid, prism, helix, gear, a soccer ball. A soccer ball is interesting because it's a type of geodesic sphere where is that correct? Where basically it's all made up of similar or the same shaped objects, but it still makes an entire sphere. So like in the other spheres, some polygons were smaller than others. So there's a lot of different starting points here that you might need, right? But again, none of them are car. So our question then is, what should our starting point be? Now, somebody said box earlier. I heard it from this area of the room, but I don't know who said that. How many of you think starting with a box, was it you, the back? So how many of you think starting with a box is the right way to go? Okay. So I kind of agree with you, but for argument's sake, let's, like, why not start with a sphere? Yeah, you'd have to manipulate a lot of stuff to turn a sphere into a boxy car shape, right? That's a lot more elements to manipulate. And so really the way I usually start, and this is, for now, this isn't that complicated. Car, box, like that was probably a pretty logical conclusion you came to. If I were going to model this bottle, probably a cylinder, right? Probably not a box, even though I could probably make it happen. It would just take more work. And so this is more of a correct thought process, right? How are you going to get to that point? But then when it comes to something that's really complicated, like a Dremel tool or a, I don't know, I'm trying to find something complicated. Like, where do you start with that? And so that's really the first thing you have, or the second thing you really kind of have to start processing. Like, and there's not necessarily a right or wrong answer. It's really about sort of planning your next few steps, right? It's kind of coming up with your path to get to the model you're wanting to get to. And sometimes you choose wrong, right? Sometimes you maybe go, I need to model Brad Pitt's face. I'm going to start with a sphere. And that nose is going to start giving you problems, and you're going to be like, I chose the wrong thing. Strangely, usually for a head, if you're box modeling it, you start, well, if you're polygon modeling it manually, you actually start with a cube, with a box. So for now, I'm going to go ahead and start with a polygon cube. Now, by default, a cube is going to give us this one face by one face by one face, right? Like it is a very simple object. I'm going to sort of pull it up here so I can see it. And that's not very much information. So no matter how much I grab this face and start moving it around, right, it's always going to be this sort of boxy shape. I need more information or more sub-objects in this to be able to deform to make a car. So to kind of go back to, where's my car picture? I lost my car picture. Oh, there it is. There we go. So kind of going back to this and I think you said like breaking it down into the sub-elements, right? If I'm going to do that, really what I want to model first is sort of the cab of the car, right? The trunk sort of makes this boxy shape here, right? So I'm going to model that first, and then I'm going to try to get the roof and the inside of the car volume after that. So primarily I'm going to get this in a shape that feels kind of appropriate for that. Let me move this back over here so I can see it. So I would probably scale it, make it a little longer, a little wider. So I'm just kind of looking at it, eyeballing it. Maybe something like this. This may be where I would start at. However, again, like I need more information on this. So when you first create an object, there are parameters for that object. And the parameters for a default box is that it is one edge loop, or one face wide, one face tall, one face deep. We can change that. So I have this object selected. If I go to my channel box and then polycube 3, you'll see that under this inputs, polycube 3, or yours may be polycube 1, I'm not for sure. You'll see that we have the options for subdivision, width, height, and depth. And all of those are set to 1. Right? Now, I want to set mine to something a little higher. I'll be honest, if you watch the videos, I'm sure there's a formula that I use. I can't remember exactly what it is. But probably what happened is I modeled it right before I started recording that video, and then I went in and did it that way. I haven't watched that video in a few weeks, so I'm going to wing this a little bit. So if I grab subdivision width and start adjusting that, you'll see that because of the direction I scaled it, even though it's saying width, it's kind of giving me a length direction here, right? I'm going to go probably with, let's try 3. And then to give me just a little bit more information on depth, I'll go ahead and put one more subdivision here. Right? And then trying to think if I want to do another height one or not. I'm not going to do another height one. I'll show you how to fix that later. So this is a good starting point. This gives us a little more material to move around, right? So if I were to grab this face, I could start moving it, right? But that's still not that's not looking like a car, right? Really, what I need now is to be able to make more mesh kind of grow up out of this. Right? So what I'm going to do first, I'm going to go ahead and sort of space these correctly, right? I need to have my hood on one side, my trunk on the other. I see that my trunk is substantially shorter than my hood, right? So I'm just going to kind of eyeball that by double clicking on that edge, and then I'm just going to slide it in this one axis. And double clicking on this one, sort of slide it like this. So maybe something like this. Now there's plenty of stuff we can start editing, right? Like the front of my car is probably going to be a little rounded, right? Or the hood of my car is probably going to slope down a little bit. So I can start doing all of that stuff. But really, I'm a little perturbed right now because I don't have any place for my head, right? I gotta, you don't have like the cab of the car sticking up out of that. So let's go ahead and make that happen. And this is where we get to start making a little bit more of a custom shape. If I select these two faces on the top, so this one and this one, again, no matter how much I pull this, it's still the same number of faces. What's really the problem is I need more geometry. I need more edge loops there, more mesh there to work with, right? Just like if you were to make that sphere, to make a face, right? Like your eyeballs have more detail than your forehead, and your nose has more detail than the side of your cheek, right? Certain areas need more fidelity. So the way I'm going to do that here is I'm going to extrude. So I'll show you the 3 different ways you can extrude. Under Edit Mesh, no, let's see here. Oh, it's always hiding from me. Yes. Under Edit Mesh, if you're in the modeling menu, Edit Mesh, you'll see Extrude right here. You'll also see Control E right there. That's the shortcut key for it. There's also, under your poly modeling menu, it's this one right here. It kind of looks like a little building with a sidewalk around it. So I like shortcut keys. I'm going to select those 2 faces, and I'm going to hit Control E. Now, it looks like nothing happened except for our little controller changed, but something significant just happened, right? What just happened is those faces kind of duplicated themselves, so we got a whole new set of faces, but they're still connected to those old faces, right? And we got a new gizmo to be able to move these around, and you'll see it has the move, a rotate, and a scale option on it. I can grab this blue channel and pull that up, and you see now I have more mesh. Okay. Now, it's important to recognize that whether you hit or whether you move that or not, we still extruded something, okay? So what people will do sometimes is they'll grab that face and they'll say, Control E. Nothing happened. Maybe I should select over here. But something did happen, right? If I select this mesh and hit W, you'll see that I did get that extra face, right? And that can be a problem because people will sometimes extrude stuff. I've undone to where it's fixed now. People will sometimes extrude stuff and not realize they did, and it'll really start hiding little errors in their model. Now, a couple of you ran into this and this is actually really something I probably should have mentioned a little earlier. Some of you accidentally hit a button when you were putting your bridge together, and it caused parts of it to turn into spikes, right? If any of you did that, like, it's okay. You didn't mess anything up. If I go back to my object mode, right, you'll notice that like, the Q, W, E, R buttons are right below the number buttons, right? So some of you accidentally hit 2 or 3. And when I hit 3, watch what happens. Got all bubbly. So what this is called is smooth mesh preview. Okay? So we didn't smooth our mesh. We just kind of previewed what it would look like if it were smoothed, right? There's a whole way to smooth this, and this will actually render smoothed as well if we're using the right render engine, but some of them won't. Really, the model at its root, or at its core, still looks the way it did. And to get back to that, we just have to hit 1. So this is with the model selected. 1 is unsmoothed, 3 is smoothed. Right? If we hit 2, it'll sort of show us both of them at the same time. So, it's important to remember that Maya still thinks of this model like this, though, right? If you export this out for a game, a video game, that's what Maya is going to export out, right? And that means that all of these edges that we're thinking about, even though when I hit 3, they start to look rounded. See how those edges sort of look like they're rounding off, like on the top here? If I go to select that edge, it's still just one edge. I can't bend that, right? It's still thinking of it like this, right? So this makes it pretty easy to start getting something that feels a little bit more like a car. Now the reason I show you that is because that is a nice tool to see if you messed up your extrude. Right? If you grab this face here and I hit Control E, and then somebody says, hey, you want to go to cookout? And you're like, I do want to go to cookout. And you go to cookout and you come back and you're like, wait, what was I doing? I don't remember. I'm going to go ahead and click off of here. Well, if I hit 3, you'll see that it did something there, right? And that's how you can tell, right, is that we're getting this weird mesh. So if I hit undo a few times, it fixes it. Okay. Now, I can start editing on my model a little bit. Like I could go in here and grab this edge here to move it in. But cars are usually symmetrical, right? And that's not giving me much symmetry to work with. Like if I wanted to scale them in together, I could hold Shift and select both of them and hit R and scale them toward each other. So that's giving us something a little closer to what I was looking for. But luckily, Maya has taken into consideration that oftentimes you are wanting to work on something symmetrically, right? So the first thing we need to think about with this is recognizing which direction is which, right? And if I'm tumbling around here, you'll see I have a little XYZ indicator down there. So XYZ, RGB, right? And see, B is Z, so B, that sounds so confusing. Blue is our Z axis. So that means side to side, we want some symmetry in our Z axis, right? So if I go up here to the top, you'll see where it says symmetry off on our status line. If I click on that, I'm going to choose object Z. Okay. So what this means is it's going to take my object's Z axis and it's going to keep things as symmetrical as possible across that. So this is pretty cool. That means if I go in here and select the roof now, it selects the other side. And if I move it, it's going to edit the other side too. So this allows me to start making some changes a little more quickly, right? Now this is a adorable little bubbly cartoon mobile, right? But maybe I want a little bit more detail than this. Or maybe this is still like, this is a little too bubbly, a little too unrefined. I want to add some stuff like maybe a little more form in the hood, right?
Hood scoop on it.
Hood scoop, right? Little tail fin in the back. We're turning this thing into a DeLorean. So, so when I want to start adding some more detail, that extrude button isn't our only option. There's actually several options. So the one I'm going to show you right now is the insert edge loop tool, right? Let's say I wanted a little bit more detail in the hood, right? I wanted it to kind of curve out and then go in a little sharper, right? So if I go back to one where we can kind of see this, it'll make more sense here. I'm going to go to Mesh Tools, and there's this Insert Edge Loop tool. So when I click that, you'll see nothing really happened, even though I had some stuff selected. It's because this is sort of an interactive insert tool. And what I have to do is select an edge, right? So if I want a little bit more on the hood, I want it to go across this way. I click along one of the perpendicular edges, right? So if I click here and hold it down, it will insert this edge loop, and then I can kind of slide to say where I want that to be. So maybe I want it to be like right there. Give me a little bit more information. And then if I hit 3, you can see that I have a little bit more information now to kind of get a sharper shape. Now again, I'm just editing in edges. You can do vertex, you can do faces, you can do whatever you want to get whatever shape you want. Now, I'm alright with the top of my car, like the hood, being a little rounded, but I kind of want the bottom to be a little sharper, right? So, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to insert another edge loop, and I'm going to try to use that edge loop to control how much roundedness we get in this, right? And so the trick to this, let's go back to 1 so you can see it. The trick to this is the distance between the edges. So if there's a big distance between this edge and this edge, Maya is going to round it a lot. It's going to round it off, right? If it's a short distance, it's going to round it less. Like it's going to just try to soften everything. So if you put two edges kind of close together, it's going to make that corner a little sharper, right? So if I go in here and go to Mesh Tools and insert another edge loop, right? If I insert it right down the center, right, and go back to W and hit 3, like it's a little sharper on the bottom. But if I start to lower that toward the bottom, you'll see it's more rounded on the top, and it becomes sharper on the bottom. Okay? And that's because the distance between those two edges is really small. In fact, I've passed it up here in the front. So let's move that back up. So if I get this down here really kind of close, and when I smooth that, the bottom of my vehicle feels a little bit sharper, right? So this will allow us to be in more control of how we want these shapes to look, right? If I want the back of this to be a little more flat, Mesh Tools. Whenever I'm in the Insert Edge Loop tool, it gives me this boxy shape around it. I can put one right there, and you'll see it sort of flattens out the back, and now it looks like a drivable shoe. So I'll maybe round off the top of my car just a little bit. That's way better. Yeah. And so what I'm doing is I'm giving myself more information to work with, right? And so obviously I go back here. The closer this looks to the vehicle you're going for, the more accurately it's going to smooth as well, right? So I'll probably do something like this. Maybe smooth that back a little bit. Get this out just a little bit. Let's do edges here. So like you don't have to follow every step here. I'm just making sort of my version of this car. And so I do 3 there. There we go. So I'm getting a little bit more something like this. Let's get this back on. So what I would encourage you to do, spend a little bit of time just kind of playing around with this, right? Now, the last thing I'm going to do on this, what time is it here? It's 1 o'clock. So this class goes to 2:05, is that correct? Okay. So the last thing I'm going to do on my car is I'm going to go ahead and create some wheels. Now again, I'm making sort of a cartoony car. Before I do all that though, I realize I've had my bridge off all of this time. I have no idea how this thing compares to my bridge. So let's turn my bridge back on. Well, it's not as far off as I would have expected. Right? So I do want it to be kind of proportionally correct. And I also, for me, I'd like it to be facing in the right direction. So I'll go ahead and raise that up, sort of line it up. I'm going to go ahead and keep mine at 0, 0, 0 in terms of the vertical over the 0 axis here. And so yeah, that's not bad. Maybe you could scale it down just a touch. Just give us some room for a second one to pass. Yeah, not bad. Okay, so for me, I'm going to make some really simple wheels. I'm just going to make a cylinder that passes all the way through it. So here's something to think about. How many of you watched Game of Thrones or something like that? Lots of. Well, how about Avengers? We'll put out Avengers. Some of you watched. Really, 2 of you have watched Avengers. So any of those movies, right? Like if we take Avengers as an example, if the Hulk is right up in your face, there needs to be a lot of detail on that model, right? There needs to be more detail on that than that car that is 3 miles away on the bridge that is exploding, right? And so we're going to be modeling these as if we're not getting super close to them. So I'm doing that just so we don't have to spend forever on modeling. We can go ahead and start jumping into some animation. However, and that's one of the reasons I'm just going to make my wheels just a cylinder. However, I recognize that everybody in this class is going to like different things. In fact, that's the reason for this class, is that everybody is going to like different things. And some of you are going to hate the modeling, right? And that means we're going to be able to just do sort of the basics of it, and then you can move on to some animation. And some of you are going to love the modeling, and you're going to want to dive deep in this. You're like, oh, it's cool. I made hood ornaments, and I made like detailed wheels. And my advice to you, run with it. Like, if you're having fun, I am never going to penalize you for putting more work in than the requirements. As long as you're not neglecting other elements of the project, right? As long as you're making sure if you're like, I made this really incredible model, but I didn't animate or render any of it. Like, that's just going to be detrimental to you project-wise, right? But if you're having fun with the modeling, go into more detail. Like, don't think that you have to stop anywhere. And that's really what's going to start to emerge as you're in this class. You're going to start to see the parts that you really like and the parts you really don't like. And then when you get to your sophomore year and you have to pick a concentration, you're going to pick the concentration that has more of the things you really like. Right? That's the way that is the pathway to a happier life. So again, like if there's something in here you're enjoying, like yeah, hang out and like work all night on it. Like have fun with it. Like that's one of the cool things about this is I do this stuff after I leave work for fun sometimes, right? I don't know that other jobs say that, right? I don't know if accountants are like, I just went home and did a bunch of math. Like, maybe they do. Maybe they do. but I don't. So like, I go home and do, because this is just fun to me. And that's, so like, find the thing you're enjoying, dive deep into it. Right now, for the sake of sort of brevity in the demonstration, I'm going to make some relatively simple wheels. Okay, so I just created a cylinder. Right? Created me a cylinder. I'm going to rotate this cylinder. So I can try to eyeball at 90 degrees, or I could type in 90 degrees. Right? Now recognize also there is a shortcut key to this. So let's say this is a 0, right? And I wanted to rotate this in increments of 15. I think is it J? Yeah. If I hold down the J key, it will rotate in increments of 15 until I get to 90. All right. So my car is just one big wheel. Um, so I do need to scale this down. A couple of scaling tricks. I mean, obviously we could scale the whole thing down, and then I can make it longer. Right. Another